Hey, and welcome to Technology Tap. I'm Professor J. Rod. In this episode, protection, compliance, and the human cost of data. Let's tap in. And welcome back to Technology Tap. I'm Professor J. Rod. For those who don't know me, I'm a professor of cybersecurity, and I love helping my students pass the Network Plus, A Plus, and Security Plus CompTIA exams. And I also like to sprinkle a little bit of history in these podcasts. But this is the last chapter in the Security Plus series, kind of shifting a little gears. I told you guys that 2026 was going to be a new year, so I'm going to give you on Monday, hopefully, when I do the next podcast, what I've been talking about the last couple of weeks. Sorry I didn't come out with a podcast so late this week. It's just been snowing and freezing the East Coast. So just want to apologize for that. I haven't been making any videos. I think I only made one post on LinkedIn. I didn't make a video on TikTok. So I apologize for that for those of you who are waiting. But next week, you're going to see all what I've been working on the last couple of months. All right, so let's get started. Let's slow down. Before we talk about GDPR, before we talk about data classifications, before we talk about policies, audit, or DLP tools, we need to talk about why this episode exists. Because data protection wasn't born out of best practice, it was born out of failure. Massive, public, expensive failure. There was a time not long ago when organizations didn't think of data as something that they needed. Data was on a file server, a spreadsheet on a shared drive, a database record nobody thought about unless something broke. Security teams focused on uptime, not privacy. IT cared about availability, not consent. And executives cared about growth, not data rights. If data leaked, the response was often, well, it wasn't intentional. But intention doesn't matter when the damage is real. Here's where everything changed. Data stopped being local. Suddenly, consumer data lived in multiple systems. Third-party vendors processed payroll, benefits, and analytics. Cloud platforms replicated data across regions automatically. And nobody, not even executives, not IT, not legal, could answer a simple question. Where exactly is our data right now? That question terrified regulators. Because when you don't know where the data is, you don't know who can access, you don't know who copied it, you don't know who sold it, and you don't know who just got harmed by it. This is the mind shift Security Plus expects. When we say data protection, we're not talking about encryption algorithms, storage systems, backup strategies. Those are tools. Data protection is about people. A leaked social security number doesn't just violate policy. It can destroy credit, enable identity theft, and ruin trust for decades. That's why the government stepped in. Let me say this clearly because students often misunderstand it. Regulations exist because organizations proved they could not be trusted to self-regulate. If companies had handled data responsibility from the beginning, GDPR wouldn't exist, HIPAA wouldn't exist, FERPA wouldn't exist. Compliance is not innovation. Compliance is damage control. So regulators and organizations ask, how do we prevent this from happening again? The first example was simple. We need to know what kind of data we're dealing with. That's where data classification comes from. Data types are categories that describe what the data represents, who it impacts, what laws applies, and what protections are required. This is why Security Plus doesn't just say data. It says regulated data, intellectual property, trade secrets, legal data, financial data, privacy data, because each one carries different consequences when mishandled. Imagine a college on the same network. You have a public events calendar, internal faculty emails, student grades, student medical accommodations. Same server, same staff, same network, but widely different risk levels. If the events calendar leaks, no one cares. If medical accommodation data leaks, you trigger legal violations, civil liability, and federal investigation. That's why classification matters. Most organizations simply simplify classifications into 3 levels. Public, no harm if exposed. Confidential, internal, some harm, controlled access. And restricted or sensitive, severe harm, strict controls. Security Plus doesn't care what your organization calls them. The exams cares that you understand. Control is increased as sensitivity increases. That's the rule. Here's a common failure pattern. An organization collects sensitive data, stores it temporarily, never classifies it, never deletes it. Years later, during a breach, they don't know it existed, they don't know where it's at, they don't know who accessed it. And ignorance is not a defense. Security Plus questions in this domain are not asking, what is the best encryption algorithm? They're asking, what should have been done before the breach? And the answer is always data classifications, inventory, policy enforcement, least privilege. Prevention beats response. Once classifications became common, regulators took the next step. They asked, who is responsible? And this is where compliance enters the story. Compliance doesn't care what you intended to do. Compliance asks, can you prove the controls exist? Can you prove they are enforced? Can you prove staff was trained? Can you prove data was deleted? If you can't prove it, it didn't happen. Policies aren't written for employees. They're written for auditors, regulators, and courts. A policy is a legal artifact. And failing to follow your own policy is worse than not having one. All right. Let's do a short review. Data protection exists because data became distributed, organizations lost visibility, and individuals were harmed. Also, trust collapse. GDPR, DLP, training awareness is an attempt to repair that trust. Now we move on into places where most organizations and most exam candidates start to get uncomfortable. Because this is where technical thinking collides with legal reality. This is when the student asks, wait, I thought the cloud handled that. No, it doesn't. Let's clear up a confusion that Security Plus loves to exploit. What kind of data is that? How important is that data? Those are not the same thing. A data type describes the nature of data itself. Examples, regulated data, trade secrets, intellectual property, legal records, financial data, and privacy data. Data types exist, whatever or not, you label them. If you collect medical data, it is regulated, even if you pretend it isn't. Data classification is an organizational decision. It assigns sensitivity, handling requirements, access control, and retention rules. Classification is about caring how you treat the data, not what the data is. Why this distinction breaks organizations? Here's the failure pattern. An organization says it's just internal data, but the data type is regulated privacy data. The classification doesn't override the law. You can't label your way out of compliance. On the Security Plus exam, when you see personal identifiable information, medical records, payment card data, your brain should immediately say, this data already comes with legal requirements. Classification is secondary. Now let's talk about where the data lives, because this is where modern environments fall apart. Years ago, data lived in one building, on a few servers, behind a firewall. Today, data lives in SaaS platforms, in cloud object storage, in backups, in logs, in analytic systems, in third-party vendors. And often, nobody knows all the places the data exists, and that's dangerous. Organizations are required to maintain data inventories, not because auditors like paperwork, but because you cannot protect what you cannot locate. A data inventory answers, What data do we collect? Where is it stored? Who can access it? How long do we keep it? Who do we share it with? Without this, compliance collapses. Retention is a security control. This is a big one. Most people think retention is a legal issue. It's actually a security issue. The longer you keep data, the longer it can be stolen, the longer you're liable, the more damage a breach causes. Security Plus expects you to understand. Deleting data is a form of protection. Data protection changes based on state. You have data at rest, stored data, database file servers backups. You have your controls, encryption, access control, and physical security. And you have data in motion, data being transferred, emails, API calls, file transfers, controls, TLS, VPN, secure protocols. Then you have data in use, data actively accessed, open files, application memory, and screens. Your controls are your endpoint protection, user authentication, and monitoring. Here's an exam tip. Different states means different controls. The geographical problem, where cloud marketing lies to you. Now let's talk about data sovereignty, because this is where many professionals get blinded. Data sovereignty means data is subject to the laws of the country where it physically resides. Not where the company's headquarters, not where the user lives, not where the cloud provider is based, where the data physically exists. Why this became a crisis. Cloud providers made data redundant, replicated, and distributed. Great for availability, terrifying for regulators. Because now data could cross borders automatically, be stored in multiple countries, be processed in jurisdictions with different laws. Here's an example of cloud storage gone wrong. An organization says, we store EU customer data in the cloud. Sounds fine. But the cloud provider replicates data to US regions, processes analytics in Asia, and stores backups globally. Congratulations, you just violated GDPR. Geographical access control. Organizations now implement region-restricted storage, geofencing, location-based access control. This isn't paranoia, it's compliance survival. Here's an exam mindset check. If a question mentions cross-border data, cloud regions, jurisdiction, or international users, your answer will involve data sovereignty, legal compliance, and geographic restrictions, not encryption alone. Automatic classification and labeling. Modern systems attempt to solve human errors. Tools like Microsoft Azure Information Protection and Office 365 DLP. They automatically label data, apply watermarks, and enforce access rules. Automation reduces mistake, but it does not remove responsibility. When automation fails, automation can fail when policies are misconfigured, exceptions pile up, and users bypass controls. Security Plus wants you to remember, technology supports policies. It doesn't replace it. Now let's breathe here, because at this point in the episode, listeners should feel something slightly uncomfortable. That discomfort is intentional, because data protection is uncomfortable. It forces organizations to admit they don't fully control data, they don't fully understand their exposure, and they are legally accountable anyway. All right, let's slow the pace again, because this act is where technical professionals stop thinking like technicians and start thinking like risk owners. This is the act where the data stops being abstract, and this is when data becomes human. We talked about data types, we talked about classifications, we talked about geography. Now let's talk about data category that carries the heaviest legal weight. Privacy data. Privacy data is any information that can be linked to an identifiable individual and relates to their personal identity, financial identity, medical identity, social or behavioral identity. If exposed, this data can harm reputation, enable fraud, violate civil rights, and trigger regulatory enforcement. This is why privacy data is treated differently. Before privacy laws, organizations ask, can we store this? After privacy laws, organizations must ask, should we store this and for how long? That question is everything. And here's where people get confused. Organizations often possess data, but they do not own privacy data in the traditional sense. Modern privacy laws emphasize the right of the data subject and the obligations of the organization. This flips the power dynamic. GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, is an EU regulation that governs how personal data of EU residents is collected, processed, stored, and shared. Applies regardless of where the organization is located. That last part is critical. If you process EU resident data, you are subject to GDPR. No exceptions for geography, no excuse for cloud providers, no we didn't know. GDPR introduced massive fines, mandatory breach notifications, individual rights enforcement, and audit authority. But more importantly, GDPR forced organizations to prove compliance. Intentions stopped mattering and documentation became survival. Security Plus loves confusions. Let's destroy that. The data subject is the individual whose data is being processed. They have rights. They are the protected party. They are the reason that regulation exists. The data controller decides why data is collected, decides how data is used, and determines retention and sharing. Controllers define purpose. They carry the primary responsibility. The data processor processes data on behalf of the controller, follows instructions, does not decide purpose. Processors still have obligations, but they don't define intent. All right, let's do an exam mindset check. If the question asks, who is responsible for ensuring GDPR compliance? The answer is not always IT. It is the data controller. IT supports compliance. Legal accountability sits higher. The right to be forgotten. One of GDPR's most famous principles. Data subjects have the right to request deletion of their personal data when it's no longer needed, consent is withdrawn, and processing was unlawful. This is not optional. Because to delete data, you must know it exists, know where it is, and know every system it touches. That's why data inventory are no longer nice to have. They are mandatory. Retention policies used to say, keep everything, storage is cheap. GDPR says, keep only what you need and justify it. Now retention limits are enforced by law. Keeping unnecessary data is a risk, not a convenience. Now let's talk about failure, because failure always happens. A data breach occurs when data is accessed, modified, and deleted without authorization. Intent does not matter. A privacy breach specifically involves personal or regulated data, exposure of individual information. Every privacy breach is a data breach, and not every data breach is a privacy breach. Because response requirements change, privacy breaches often require regulatory notification, public disclosure, and direct notifications to affected individuals. Silence is not an option. Most laws specify time limits, often in 72 hours, notification receipts, documentation requirements. Failure to notify correctly can be worse than the breach itself. Let's remove the buzzwords. Real consequences include reputational collapse, customer abandonment, civil lawsuits, regulatory fines, and executive termination. Organizations rarely recover from multiple privacy failures. Let's do an exam mindset check. Security Plus questions in this area are not asking, how do we stop every breach? They are asking, what should happen after a breach is discovered? Correct answers often include notifications, documentations, legal compliance, process improvement. At this point in the episode, listeners should feel something shift, because this is no longer about servers, firewalls, and tools. This is about people trusting organizations with their lives, finance, and identities. And trust, once broken, doesn't reset. All right, let's end this episode with most security incidents actually begin. Not with hackers, not with malware, not with 0 days, but with people. Because you have perfect encryption, perfect segmentation, and perfect cloud architecture, and still lose everything because someone clicked the wrong thing, shared the wrong files, or ignored the policy they never fully understand. Here's the truth most organizations don't like to admit. Technology rarely fails first. People do. That's why this lesson doesn't stop at data protection and compliance. It moves directly into personnel policies, and security awareness. Because compliance without human alignment is an illusion. Most people think policy exists to control employees and to protect their organizations legally. Well, that's half the truth. Conduct policies define acceptable and unacceptable behavior regarding systems, data, communications, privacy, professional conduct. They protect the organizations, the employee, the data subject, whether people like them or not. Let's strip away the buzzwords. Acceptable Use Policy, AUP, defines what systems may be used for, what activities are prohibited, what monitoring is allowed. Translation, here's what you can do and what gets you fired. Yeah, you cannot. Acceptable Use Policy, which most people have to sign yearly nowadays, shows like you can't be gambling at work. You can't be looking at adult sites at work. That computer's not yours. They can do whatever they want. They could look at your emails. They don't need a warrant. It's their equipment, guys. Remember that. You work at an organization. It's their stuff. They can look at it. They don't need to ask you. It's not your computer. Remember, your computer at work is not your computer. Code of conduct defines ethical behavior, respect for privacy, and professional responsibility. Translation, your actions represent us even when technology is evolved. Social media policies, I don't understand how people in this day, in the year 2026, are still getting fired for stuff that they post on social media. Guys, if you don't like what somebody wrote, scroll up, right? Read it, close it. You don't have to post what you like. Social media policy defines what employees may share, what must remain confidential, and brand and privacy protection. Translation, one post can undo years of trust. And here's one thing I definitely don't like. Bring your own devices. Personally owned devices. Define security requirements for personnel devices. Monitoring expectations and data separation rules. Translation, your phone is not a security risk. Clean desk policy defines physical protection of information, document handling, and workspace expectations. Translation, screenshot and shoulder surfing still exist. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most employees don't read policies, don't remember policies, and don't understand why policies exist. So organizations must go further. Training reality check. An untrained user is easier to phish, more likely to mishandle data, and less likely to report incidents. Security awareness training exists because firewalls don't stop mistakes. Training must be tailored to end users, IT staff, administrators, executives, because each role has different access, poses different risk, and faces different attack vectors. One-size-fits-all training fails. Let's connect these to real incidents. Phishing awareness, because one email can deploy ransomware, steal credentials, exfiltrate data. Password management, because reuse of password is rampant. Weak passwords still exist, and MFA isn't universal. Insider threat awareness, because not all attacks are external. The guy who you worry about is not the guy sitting in his basement. It's the guy sitting at the desk. Some are careless, some are malicious, some are desperate. Removable media, because USBs still work and malware still spreads. And curiosity still wins. Hybrid and remote work, because home networks are weaker, oversight is reduced, and boundaries are blurred. Security awareness training is a life cycle. This is a security plus concept, not a buzzword. Effective security awareness follows a cycle. Assess risk, train users, simulate attacks, measure behavior, and improve training. Then repeat. Training is never done. That's why you always do it every year. Phishing simulations aren't punishment. They are behavioral measurements, risk assessments, and training reinforcement. People don't learn security from slides. They learn it from experience. Let's address something that most organizations avoid: the insider threat. An insider threat is a risk originating from within the organization, including malicious intent, negligence, and compromised credentials. Not all insiders are villains, but all insiders have access. You can have somebody who could do it accidentally. Why awareness is the last line of defense. When prevention fails, when detection is delayed, when controls are bypassed, awareness is what stops damage from spreading. An employee who reports quickly can limit breach scope, reduce fines, and preserve trust. Silence is far more dangerous than mistakes. This is why I tell my students, if you work in IT and you see somebody doing something that they're not supposed to do, you need to say something, right? It's see something, say something. And I just give them a simple example. What if you're supposed to, have plans for the weekend, but you know somebody's downloading illegal movies at the office, and they download something that's not a movie, it's malware. Now you got to work Saturday and Sunday to clean this mess, where if you would have told on this person, if you would have said, hey, this guy's doing this, right? They would have fired him and you just keep it moving. But some people still have that mentality. I don't want to tell. All right, here's a last exam mindset. Security Plus questions in this domain ask, which controls reduces the likelihood of a breach caused by human error? The answer is rarely encryption, firewalls, or network segmentation. The answer is often training, policy enforcement, and awareness programs. All right, let's land this episode. Data protection is not just a technical responsibility, a legal requirement, or a compliance checkbox. It is a human obligation. Every record represents a person, a family, a life impacted by your controls or your failure. All right, let's do the 4 questions. And how it is, I read the question, give you the 4 possible choices, then read it again, and then I give you 5 seconds. Question number 1, which role under GDPR determines why personal data is collected and how it's processed? A, data processor, B, data subject, C, data controller, or D, data custodian. Which role under GDPR determines why personal data is collected and how is it processed? A, data processor, B, data subject, C, data controller, or D, data custodian. I'll give you 5 seconds to think about it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the answer is C, data controller. The data controller defines purpose and processing. Processors act on instructions. Security Plus frequently tests accountability, not technical execution. Question number 2. Which concept ensures data remains subject to the laws of the country where it physically resides? A, data retention, B, data classification, C, data sovereignty, or D, data masking. Which concept ensures data remains subject to the laws of the country where it physically resides? A, data retention, B, data classification, C, data sovereignty, or D, data masking. I'll give you 5 seconds to think about it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the answer is C, data sovereignty. Data sovereignty governs jurisdiction. Cloud replication does not remove legal boundaries. A common exam trap. All right, guys, we're halfway there. Question 3. What is the primary goal of data loss prevention? A, encrypt or store data. B, detect malware activity. C, prevent unauthorized data exfiltration. Or D, replace access control. What is the primary goal of data loss prevention? A, encrypt or store data. B, detect malware activity. C, prevent unauthorized data exfiltration. Or D, replace access control. I'll give you 5 seconds to think about it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. DLP the answer is C, prevent unauthorized data exfiltration. DLP focus on data movement and misuse, not malware detection or encryption alone. All right, last one. Why is security awareness training considered a life cycle? A. Regulators require annual training. B. Threats and behaviors continuously evolve. C. Training software expires. Or D. Employees forget passwords. Here it is again. Why is security awareness training considered a life cycle? A. Regulators require annual training. B. Threats and behaviors continuously evolve. C. Training software expires. Or D. Employees forget passwords. I'll give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is an interesting one because you can, by just reading the question, there's a key word in that question, and it's life cycle, right? Why is security awareness training considered a life cycle? So the two that you can eliminate right away is training software expires and employees forgets password, right? Because they're not talking anything about life cycle in there. So your choice with A and B, right? Regulators require annual training, and that's right. I can see people falling for that because they see annual training and then they see life cycle. But the answer is B. Threats and behavior continuously evolve, right? So it's a life cycle because it continues. It doesn't stop like a life cycle, right? Well, it stops if you die, but I'm saying in this case, it's a life cycle. The answer is B. Threats and behavior continuously evolve. Security Plus emphasizes adaptability. Training must evolve with attack methods and human behavior. All right. Hopefully you got all 4 for 4. That'll be great. If you've been listening to these series, hopefully you are ready for your Security Plus. All right. Cybersecurity isn't about perfection. It's about responsibility. Responsibility to understand data, respect privacy, and train people. And also respond honestly when things go wrong. That's what this episode is really about. And that's what it matters. All right, hopefully that's all the 16 chapters that I got from CertMaster, CompTIA CertMaster, that I broke it down. If you want to listen to it, you can search the other 15 chapters on here. I got all 16 on this podcast. Listen to it, study, go and take your Security Plus exam. And good luck. And let me know if you have succeeded. Next week, the big news that I've been holding down. And I cannot wait to share this with everyone. I'm just waiting it for perfect time. I wanted to finish this Security Plus before I go into it. So this has been killing me. Holding the secret, but we will see you next week. And remember, I'm Professor J Rod, and keep tapping into technology. This has been a presentation of Little Cha-Cha Productions, art by Sarah, music by Joe Kim. We're now part of the Pod Match Network. You can follow me at TikTok at Professor J Rod, that's JROD, or you can email me at ProfessorJRod, JROD, at gmail.com.